being recorded for meeting note purposes only.
Cara, is everything okay on your end?
Yes, everything's working great here. I'm ready. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, so it's 3 o'clock, so we'll get started. I assume a couple of people will still join on, but just get started with the session. So good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Maria Jitomirski, and I'm the manager of special cargo at IATA, an area that's responsible for standard setting activities which are focused on establishing live animal handling and transport regulations, including the IATA Live Animals regulations, which are developed to ensure industry compliance, qualified animal safety and welfare. I'm joined today by Dr. Cara Williams from the CDC to discuss the recent decision to temporarily suspend the import of dogs from countries that the CDC considers high risk for dog rabies. The purpose of the call today is for Dr. Williams to shed some light on this decision and to support airlines with their preparations to these changes, particularly steps that they're expected to take as of July 14th. Before I pass it off to Dr. Williams, I'd like to just quickly touch on a few housekeeping items. As Lucy mentioned, the session is being recorded, and we kindly ask that you mute your mics until the Q&A session. The presentation will last 20 minutes, following which you'll have the opportunity to raise your questions. You can do so either by using the chat function or raising your hand, and we'll try to cover as many questions as possible during the allocated time. Those questions remaining will be covered in an FAQ, and we'll post them on the IATA website afterwards, along with the webinar recording and any handouts. Details on where you can find these will be shown towards the end of the session. So thank you to everybody for joining today, and Dr. Williams for making yourself available for this essential informative session. I'd also like to thank Gabriela Tamasi from IAG, who is the current chairman of the Live Animals and Perishables Board, and who will be supporting with the session. Gabriela, if you could please outline the competition law guidelines, and then we can get started with the webinar. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can we have the next slide, please, Maria, with the competition law? If not, I would just like to ask every participant on the call to ensure not to discuss any items that would be breach of the competition guidelines. We will be moderating the Q&A according to the competition law, and I trust that each participant will obey the rules. Thank you. May I also ask, when you're not speaking, please mute yourself so that we have the best sound quality possible. Thank you and welcome. Back to you, Maria.
Yeah, thank you, Cara. I think you can take over and share your content directly.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk today. Let me just share my screen here. Okay, so I am, is it sharing? Uh-oh, hold on a second.
Yes, perfect, it's all good, yeah.
Okay, great, now I can see it, all right. So I'm Dr. Cara Williams. I'm a veterinary medical officer with the Division of Global Migration and Quarantine in the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with IATA today and all of the member airlines who have joined and who will be watching the recording afterwards. It's very important to CDC that we answer your questions about the upcoming suspension of dogs entering the United States from countries at high risk for rabies. And we are really relying on your assistance to help us enforce this new emergency suspension. So I'll just start going through these slides. The purpose of this presentation is to review the temporary suspension of dogs entering the United States from countries at high risk for a canine rabies virus variant or dog rabies. We'll be discussing the temporary suspension in enough detail to hopefully answer most of your questions. So effective July 14th, so not yet, but in about 2 weeks, on July 14th, no dogs arriving from rabies high-risk countries will be allowed to enter the United States. This suspension also includes dogs that have visited a high-risk country in the past 6 months, even if they are arriving from a country not at high risk. There are exceptions for some dogs that will be granted a valid CDC dog import permit in advance. We'll discuss that in detail shortly. The suspension will be reviewed by CDC periodically and at least yearly. CDC is taking this action to ensure the health and safety of dogs imported into the United States and to protect the public's health against the reintroduction of dog rabies. CDC estimates that only about 6% of all dogs imported into the United States currently arrive from countries at high risk for dog rabies. So we're anticipating that the majority of dog imports will not actually be affected by the suspension. In 2020, CDC identified a large increase in the number of inadequately vaccinated dogs that were denied entry into the United States from high-risk countries compared with the previous 2 years. These inadequately vaccinated dogs were not protected against rabies, and they present a public health threat. Additionally, reduced flight schedules combined with the lack of safe animal holding facilities at airports across the United States have created unsafe conditions for the dogs and for airport staff. Dogs denied entry are currently facing longer wait times to be returned to their country of departure. And dogs have been housed, as you are aware, in airline cargo warehouses for prolonged periods of time, leading to illness and sometimes even death in a few cases. The suspension will protect the health and safety of imported dogs by preventing importations of inadequately vaccinated dogs and by ensuring that imported dogs are housed in a safe manner if they are detained for any reason. Rabies, one of the deadliest zoonotic diseases, accounts for an estimated 59,000 human deaths every year around the world. And dog rabies is responsible for 99% of these human deaths from rabies. Dog rabies was eliminated from the United States in 2007, but since recently, in the past 6 years, since 2015, there have actually been 4 cases of rabid dogs imported into the United States from high-risk countries. All of them are rescue dogs, and each importation risks our current status as being dog rabies free in the United States. This temporary suspension will protect the public's health against the reintroduction of dog rabies from rabies high-risk countries, while CDC works to find a better long-term solution to regulating dog imports from high-risk countries. So this is a temporary suspension, and we are working on developing a better system to be able to screen and safely allow the importation of dogs from high-risk countries in the future. So which countries are high risk for canine rabies or dog rabies? Dogs arriving from these countries highlighted in blue and dogs that visited these countries in the past 6 months cannot enter the United States. So we are asking that airlines verify the dog's 6-month travel history prior to boarding a flight in the United States. And I know we've received a lot of questions about this, and so, we're not expecting you all to be investigators and searching, background screen checks on the dog's history, but we are asking if you have people who are taking connecting flights from high-risk countries to a low-risk country and then planning to go directly to the United States, you should be able to identify that and not allow it, as well as just asking the importers, just have them verbally verify or in writing verify that the dog has not been in a high-risk country in the past 6 months. So those are just like basic screening tools that we're asking for airlines to conduct to help us make sure that these animals coming into the country meeting CDC entry requirements. We have limited the number of people who are eligible for a permit, a CDC dog import permit, to have an exception to the suspension. And I'll go through which categories of people are eligible to apply. CDC dog import permits are granted on an extremely limited case-by-case basis. They will not be issued under any circumstances at the port of entry, so people need to apply for them in advance and have the permits with them when they board your flights. We are asking people interested in bringing dogs to the United States to submit applications for CDC dog import permits to our email address, cdcanimalimport@cdc.gov, at least 30 business days, which is 6 weeks before planned travel. And we've really clearly stated in these websites exactly how they need to apply. And we've provided the application online for them to submit to us via email. Personal pet owners wishing to import a dog from a high-risk country to the United States must be one of the following: either a United States government employee with a permanent change of station or temporary duty orders. So they have to have official orders that are travel orders indicating that they need to move to the United States. Or they can be a United States citizen or a foreign country citizen that has obtained lawful U.S. residency to permanently relocate to the United States. So people from countries outside of the United States would have to have some kind of visa that's not a short-term visitor type visa to be able to indicate that they're relocating long-term for reasons such as employment or education. The last category of personal pet owners that are eligible to apply for a permit are owners of a service dog, which is defined in the Department of Transportation, Americans with Disability Act regulation found in Title 14 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 382. And I'll briefly describe that here. So according to the Department of Transportation regulations, a service animal means any guide dog, signal dog, or other animal individually trained to work or perform tasks for an individual with a disability. And this does not include emotional support animals, comfort animals, or companionship animals, as well as service animals that are in training. So it would have to be the person with a disability who has their service dog that is applying for the permit to bring the dog with them. The last category of people who can apply for permits are owners of dogs that are not personal pets, and that the dogs are intended for use as science, education, exhibition, or law enforcement purposes. And we do have a definition in the regulation of science, education, and exhibition. And we've received a lot of questions about what does exhibition for dogs mean. And our current regulation is for all animals. And so the definition of exhibition is more intended for like zoo animals. And it specifies animals that will be on display to the public at least 5 days a week. And so show dogs and dogs that are going to be entering sporting competitions or other type of competitions are not considered exhibition dogs according to our exhibition animals according to our regulation. So who cannot apply for a permit? CDC dog import permits for dogs from high-risk countries will not be issued to import dogs intended for rescue, resale, or transfer of ownership. So the person has to already own the dog and be living in a foreign country to be eligible to apply for a permit to relocate to the United States. Permits will not be issued to short-term travelers to and from high-risk countries with personal pet dogs. So even if the person is from the United States and they want to travel to a high-risk country for vacation or for a short amount of time, and then where they're not actually relocating to live in that other country long term. And then eventually they want to come back to the United States. If it's just short-term travel, they're not eligible. And then the last thing is brokers, agents, shippers, or anybody else may not apply on behalf of an importer. So the owner of the actual dog or the importer of the dog has to apply themselves for a permit. Permit application requirements. Oh, I did want to specify that brokers, agents, and shippers, they may submit the pre-issued permits to Customs and Border Protection and may arrange transport for the permitted dogs to enter the country. They just can't apply to CDC for the permit. So once the permit has been issued to the importer of the dog, then a broker or a shipper or an agent can get involved from that point and submit that permit to Customs and to help arrange for flight travel and things like that. So dogs that are eligible for a permit must meet 4 requirements. They have to be at least 6 months old, which is a change from our current requirements for dogs from high-risk countries. Before, like currently we were requiring only 4 months, but for dogs to get a permit, we've increased that to 6 months old. So now they have to be 6 months old to be eligible for a permit. They have to be microchipped. They have to have a valid rabies vaccination certificate, which CDC will be verifying in advance when before we issue the permit. So you won't be expected to look at rabies certificates anymore. And they must have a rabies serologic titer from an approved laboratory if the dog was vaccinated outside of the United States. Currently, there are 5 labs that are approved, 1 in China, 1 in Korea, the United Kingdom, France, and Mexico. And CDC rabies branch is currently working to approve more labs as soon as possible because with the 5 approved labs currently, it's taking a while for people to be able to get their rabies titers, which for any dog that was vaccinated outside of the United States, we won't issue a permit until they've submitted their rabies serologic titers. This slide, I'm going to read the bullet points in a little bit out of order, but the first one, for permit application stipulations. The application submission does not guarantee approval. People can apply, and if CDC denies the permit application, there is no appeals process. So denied permit applications cannot be appealed. And if you go down to the bottom here, importers may be granted permits for a maximum of 3 personal pet dogs and only for 1 trip during the entire temporary suspension. So again, these permits are intended for people who need to relocate permanently to the United States. So we're only issuing permits for 1 trip during the entire suspension. And then in the middle here is an important bullet point that I want to touch on. Dogs with a CDC import permit must enter the United States through a port of entry that has a live animal care facility with a CBP issued FIRMS code. Currently, the only airport that CBP has approved an animal holding facility at is JFK International Airport in New York City. So all dogs with a permit have to enter through New York City. We have had to make an exception for this though. So for the port of entry rule, there is an exception from July 14th until October 14th. United States government employees on official orders, such as permanent change of station, tour of duty, or rest and relaxation orders. If the government employees have already been issued their official orders, they must have a permit still, but they can enter through any port of entry, not just JFK, since their official orders were already issued prior to the announcement of the suspension and cannot be changed. So we're going to be allowing U.S. government employees with a permit to enter any port of entry in the United States until October 14th. U.S. government employees on official travel orders will have an official government passport, so you'll be able to look at that when you're looking at the passport and ask them, looking at the permit, the CDC permit. If you notice they're not going to JFK Airport, as long as they have official government passport, then they will be allowed to enter through any port of entry up until October 14th. So here we provided an example of what the permit will look like, and the key features of it that you should be focusing on when you review the permits to make sure they're valid. Airlines are expected to review CDC dog import permits prior to boarding a dog. When reviewing a permit, ensure that the CDC logo and permit number are included. So the logo should be up top, and then the permit number will be in the first box here. Confirm that the permit has not expired. We'll have the date of expiration here, just below. And so the permit is valid between the date of issuance until the date it expires. Verify that the dog presented to the airline matches the description on the permit. So we'll have the identification of the dog with the date of birth and the breed, the sex, and the date of rabies vaccination certificate, color, microchip number. So you can compare this information to what the dog actually looks like and make sure it's the same dog. Confirm the arrival information, which will be just below here in number 4. So the U.S. port of entry should say John F. Kennedy Airport until other ports of entry are approved. Again, an exception has been made for any person on official orders between July 14th and October 14th. So for the first 3 months of the suspension, people on an official order will have an official government passport that you can verify to make sure that it's okay for them to go to any airport other than JFK. And then lastly, the arrival date is listed here under the arrival information. It can be different than the flight date due to changes in travel plans, as long as travel is occurring between the date the permit was issued and the date that permit expires. Okay, in what situations will dogs get denied entry? Dogs not meeting requirements will be denied entry and returned to the country of departure at the importer's expense. If the dog is arriving from a high-risk country and it does not have a valid CDC dog import permit, or it arrives with a permit but at a non-approved port of entry, of course, unless it's a U.S. government employee before October 14th, or if the dog is arriving from a high-risk country and does not match the permit presented on arrival. Any of those 3 options, the dogs will be denied entry and returned to the country of departure on the next available flight. Airlines are expected to deny boarding on flights from high-risk countries headed for the United States to any dog that does not have a CDC import permit, including service dogs. This will help to avoid the need to arrange return travel when the dog gets denied entry upon arrival at a U.S. port of entry. We are working with CBP to identify additional ports of entry, but again, for now, all dogs with a CDC permit must enter through JFK unless they are a U.S. government employee on official travel orders before October 14th. So in summary, effective in 2 weeks, July 14th, CDC is temporarily suspending importation of dogs from rabies high-risk countries. CDC dog imports will be granted on an extremely limited case-by-case basis. Dogs without a permit will be denied entry and returned to the country of departure at the owner's expense. And no permits will be given upon arrival, and no appeal will be given for denied permit applications. We have several resources for airlines to help you through this transition period and to help you with reviewing what to do when looking at permits. And so, like, we have this handout that we're going to be distributing through IATA that explains step by step what to look for in a CDC dog import permit. And then we have a handout about airline carrier responsibilities when you're going to be transporting animals to the United States. And it describes like knowing which countries are high risk, and understanding CDC's rules, who's responsible for the animals if the animals are abandoned, which is the airlines, what to do if the animals are put on hold or denied entry, or if they're sick. The responsibility for the custody of the animals lies with the airline. And so we provide these tools for you to kind of help you plan and figure out what to do. And we have another handout as well that explains what your responsibilities are when planning and for importing an animal, a dog or a cat from any country into the United States. If the dogs are placed on hold or cats are placed on hold, especially if they're sick, the airline is responsible for finding a veterinary facility or a kennel to house those animals until they're cleared for entry. And so we have some handouts for you to help you prepare for that. Last, we have a bunch of links with all of our new websites that will give you more information. I especially want to point out the Then and Now website. It's got a nifty little table that compares what the regulations are before July 14th and what the requirements become after July 14th. And then for more information on the temporary suspension, please contact the zoonosis team at CDC Animal Imports at cdc.gov. I will say we are experiencing a delay in response time though. So I meant to put my email up here for you all, because it might take us 2 weeks to get an answer to you. So if you need a response sooner, you can contact me at cdc.gov. And with that, I'd like to open it up for some questions. I'll leave this up here for you to get my email real quick. But yeah, that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. We really appreciate your very informative presentation. Before we proceed to the question and answers, for those who are not familiar with the competition law, we have displayed the text in the chat box, so please ensure you do not discuss market allocations, pricing, or anything that may influence the decision-making of your competitor airline. We have received some questions prior to the webinar, and we thought it might be helpful to start with the pre-submitted questions. And once we answer these, there are about half a dozen, we can then proceed and take further questions from the audience.
Oh, I can't hear you anymore, Gabriella. You've been muted.
Oh, thank you. I'm back. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. I'm sorry about that. I don't know what happened there, technology. So the first question we have received for you is, how does an airline verify if an animal originated in a high-risk country if all paperwork the airline is presented with does not indicate this? What should an airline look for to determine if an animal visited a high-risk country?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We don't really expect you to become investigators. So if all the paperwork doesn't mention any high-risk countries, like the veterinary records or whatever the importer hands to you to review, there's no indication that it came from a high-risk country, if they're not coming from a flight that's transiting, from a high-risk country to a low-risk country and then coming to the United States, if that's not the case, we're hoping that you can at least just ask them, hey, has this dog been in a high-risk country for the past 6 months? Because even for us, our requirements for any animals arriving from a country that's not at high risk, we only require that the person provide a verbal statement to us that the dog hasn't been in a high-risk country in the past 6 months. So they just have to say it to us. And legally, we can't force them to do anything else to prove that they haven't been in a high-risk country. So our government is kind of limited in what we can do to verify that. But we can see things like if what recent flights the person has been on that's bringing the animal, and we can look at the veterinary records and that are presented with the animal. And so we're asking that you all try to do the same as well.
Thank
That
you.
makes sense.
Yes, I'm sure that has answered the question.
Mm-hmm.
The next question is, has the CDC considered a system similar to that of the London Heathrow Animal Reception Centre, where all paperwork is sent in advance and an approval number is given to the airline to proceed? This would ensure compliance with the regulation.
Yes, that would make it easier than our current system right now. So we are looking at, we're comparing what the regulations and requirements are at other countries around the world, what requirements they have, because we are working on changing our regulations and updating them as well to make it safer and easier to reliably allow safe importations from countries at high risk for rabies. And right now we don't have that system in place because we just needed to put this emergency temporary suspension in place now with the tools that we currently have, because our current regulations of just requiring the rabies vaccination certificate isn't effectively protecting the country against rabid dog importations, because we've already had 4 rabid dog importations recently, and the imports of inadequately vaccinated dogs are increasing. So we had to put this emergency stop measure in place for now while we develop our regulations. And we are going to consider what the United Kingdom is doing and what other countries are doing. Sorry, I saw this question pop up. And so we are taking all of that into consideration, but we don't have that in place right now. And we couldn't consider that before putting this in place because we needed to do something on an emergency basis.
Thank you. May I ask the audience to please wait until we finish the pre-submitted questions so that we don't confuse the participants. Thank you. So the next question we have from prior to the meeting is, how often will the high-risk list be reviewed, and will the industry be informed of the review dates well in advance?
The high-risk list is reviewed at least yearly. So like I said, I'm part of the Division of Global Migration and Quarantine in CDC, and we enforce the suspension, but we don't select countries. So the part of CDC that analyzes the rabies risk level of each country around the world is called the Rabies Branch, and they review their risk assessment of each country at least yearly, usually around the beginning of the year, every year. But any country is allowed to contact them at rabies@cdc.gov at any time to ask for a review. And it can't be individuals from that country, but it's like the actual governments of foreign countries can contact the Rabies Branch, and they do contact the Rabies Branch periodically. And so they'll do a review of an assessment of a country upon request periodically throughout the year as well. So if a country drops from a high risk down to a not high risk, that will become effective immediately. But if it's going the opposite way, if it's a non-high risk country ends up being determined to be actually high risk, we will give advance notice to all the airlines and to the public about the change in status. So we had a country just recently changed. Ecuador recently changed from low risk to high risk, and we didn't have that advance note. Like it just went effective immediately, and we realized that caused a lot of problems and confusion. So now we've set up a system in place where we will give advance notice for future countries that jump from low risk to high risk.
And are you able to advise how long that notice is likely to be?
30 days.
Perfect, thank you. The next question is, how would a dog owner know when traveling from the US that they will be able to return with their dog in a few months' time?
Let me read this. How would a dog owner know when traveling from the US that they will be able to return with their dog in a few months' time? So we are advising dog owners from the United States to contact us or to review our websites to see if they are eligible to bring their dog to a foreign country and then back again before they leave with the dog, because short-term travelers from the United States bringing their dog to a high-risk country are not eligible for a permit to bring their dog back during the suspension. So they aren't going to be able to bring their dog back for the majority of the cases. If they're relocating for work or education or for some other reason where they have to go and live in a high-risk country for a while, and then eventually they need to move back to the United States to relocate here, we will consider that on a case-by-case basis, and that's why we're asking all dog owners, no matter what country they're from, to contact us before they plan to travel in and out of the United States with their dog from a high-risk country, because short-term travelers will not be issued permits.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
CDC states that airlines must return the dog on the next available flight. What care and rest can be provided to ensure the safety and the welfare of the animal prior to deportation?
Right. So the Animal Welfare Act is actually regulated by a different division of the United States government. It's regulated by the United States Department of Agriculture rather than CDC. But the Animal Welfare Act is vague in the time frame needed for appropriate rest between flights. And so our understanding is once they are off the flight and going through the customs process, that usually takes a few hours several hours before the animals will be put back onto the flight to go back to the country of departure. And that CDC stance is that being able to send the dogs back on the same day should meet that requirement, the Animal Welfare Act requirement.
Thank you. But going back to this answer.
So like they don't need to stay overnight to rest at a pet hotel or anything like that. They can go back on the same day.
So you would force the carrier to return it immediately?
They're required to return it in the next outbound flight, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question is, does the CDC not believe that they may have applied a too broad blanket and it advertently will penalize compliant people instead of a measured approach of penalization of non-compliant point of origins or agents?
CDC does recognize that this emergency temporary suspension is negatively affecting like the majority of people who are compliant with dog importation. So we understand that we're negatively affecting compliant people right now, but we just feel like we need to put this emergency act into place because animals currently are falling ill and dying at the ports of entry. And then we've recently had another rabid dog importation. And if dog rabies gets reestablished into the United States, that's going to be a big public health disaster for the country. And we need to stop that now. And so our intention is to keep the suspension temporary until we have a better system in place that doesn't inadvertently penalize everybody. But the risks outweigh the damage at this moment, because we have to compare what will happen to continuing to allow the health of these animals to be at risk and the health of the country's public to be at risk with the current system that we have in place.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have the final question, which has been pre-submitted. If a dog from high-risk country does arrive other than JFK, what is an acceptable overnight facility if there is no flight until the following day or even multiple days? Can a bonded kennel facility be used to hold and care for the dog prior to deportation?
Right. So this is the main reason why we have made the requirement for all dogs from high-risk countries with permits to enter through JFK in New York City, because that is currently the only airport across the United States that has an animal holding facility that is approved by CBP. Again, CDC, we don't approve the facilities, but CBP, Customs and Border Protection, they do the approvals. And there's only one. We are talking to facilities at ports all over the country to try to encourage them to apply for a FIRMS code through CBP so that they can also be eligible. But right now we only have the one. And so if you're bringing animals to an airport that's not JFK, there's no approved facility by CBP. And then the custody, dogs legally are considered goods. And so if they are denied entry or if they're put on hold, they are goods that have not cleared customs yet, and they are maintained under the custody of the airline until they have either cleared customs or been denied and returned to where they came from. And so you, the airlines, are responsible for the care and the holding and the veterinary, finding the facilities, veterinary facilities or kennels, and transportation of the animals, because the custody of those goods, which are dogs and cats, fall to the airline until they're cleared. And so we have those job aids. CDC is expecting that if you are planning on transporting any dogs or cats to any airport in the US, you should already have a plan in place of where you would send an animal to if it needs to be put on hold for a prolonged period of time until it can clear customs. Or if you have a veterinary facility identified that you've checked with CBP, is it okay that you send them to that facility? You have to check. You have to find that and identify those facilities. And this has been a big problem for us throughout these past couple of years, especially since COVID started, and then the wait periods have been prolonged because we're finding that a lot of the airlines do not have these facilities already identified, even though that's your responsibility. So then it's a scramble for you trying to figure out where to send these animals when CDC or any other agency puts them on hold.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That concluded all the pre-submitted questions, so maybe we can start looking at the questions coming in from the chat. And also, if anybody would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and we will come to you as well. The handouts will be shared after the meeting, so we will be sending them out in an email, and also, as Dr. Williams mentioned, most of the aid is also available on the CDC's website, so you will have all the material available to support the airlines. The next one is, there are airlines that do not have direct flights or does not fly to the US at all. What kind of support and checks do you require for them to conduct?
So if your airline is not flying an animal to the United States, then we don't expect anything of you. We're just trying to make sure that animals that arrive here don't, that they meet our entry requirements in the United States.
Thank you. Do we need to keep copies of the permits for audit purposes?
So CDC doesn't have that requirement for the airlines, but I think you should probably check with your legal advisors about that for yourselves. But CDC, we don't have that requirement for you. We keep all of the permits in our own records that we issue.
Thank you. Do you have an idea of how long this temporary suspension will last?
So, like I said, we're using this time to recreate and to update our permanent regulations. Like this suspension is just an emergency Federal Register notice, which does not carry the permanency of a regulation. And so we're trying to rewrite our regulations, and that process takes a while. So we're expecting the suspension to be in place for at least a year. I'm not sure how much longer than that.
Thank you. How will the CDC procure costs from the importer for re-export to avoid animal abandonment, leaving the airline to absorb re-export costs? Are there any sanctions on the owner, such as prohibited entry to the USA?
So is the beginning of the question how to avoid the animals being abandoned? Can you repeat just the beginning part of the question?
Sorry. How will the CDC procure costs from the importer for re-export to avoid animal abandonment, leaving the airline to absorb re-export costs?
Okay, so CDC does not obtain costs from the importers. So the CDC expects the airlines and requires the airlines to return the animals on the next available flight, or to transport them to a veterinary facility or to an animal holding facility if the animals are placed on a hold. And it's the airline's responsibility to get that done. And then the airline has the right to make the business decision to obtain the costs from the importer, however you're able to do that. But you have to send the dog back immediately, or send them to transport them to the veterinary or animal holding care facility right away while the custody is under the airline.
Thank you.
Question. The second half of the question was the importers, can they be prosecuted or anything like that? And so CDC does not have enforcement authority to pursue the importers, but we are able to put them on a problematic importer list, and we verify when they're coming back if there have been issues. If the importers have violated permits in the past, we won't be issuing other permits to them again. And then Customs and Border Protection, they do have the authority to follow up with the importers and place them on an increased inspection list and things like that. So it's kind of limited what we can do, but there are some things that we can do toward the importers. But the way that the regulations are right now written, the responsibility is with the airlines, and that's what we're able to enforce.
Thank you. Does this restriction apply to dog transit within 24 hours? For example, a dog from China to Mexico with 10 hours stopover at Los Angeles.
Can you say that again?
So does this restriction apply to dogs doing transit within 24 hours? For example, a dog from China to Mexico with 10 hours stopover at Los Angeles. Is that exempt?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So like in transit shipments from a high-risk country stopping through the United States and then going to some other country, right? So for in-transit shipments, CDC does not require a permit or that the animal doesn't have to meet CDC requirements as long as they're not going through customs. So, you know, if it's like a connecting in-transit flight and they don't go through customs, then they're fine. They don't need a permit. But if it's the type of situation where they have like 2 different flights that aren't really connected and they're hours apart and the person has to actually enter through customs, they need to be able to pass clearance or else the dog will be returned back to where it came from. And so they'd have to have a permit if they're coming from a high-risk country. And then they're going to enter customs and then go to a hotel overnight and then go to a different airport or airline to go to another country. So the main key factor is, are they going through U.S. customs or not? If they are, they need a permit, and if they're not, then they don't.
Thank you. AHAB is a country on the high-risk list. Can we send dogs from a country not included in the list but transit through AHAB?
It's the same thing. If the animals are from a not high-risk country and they're going to transit through a high-risk country, as long as they don't actually officially enter the country, like leave the airport, go through customs in that foreign country and enter that other country, then that's okay. They can transit on to the United States. But once they officially enter, if they end up officially entering the high-risk country, then they're going to have to meet our permit requirements. They need a permit to come to the U.S.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The next question will come from Felipe from Lancago. Felipe, would you like to ask your question, please? Please
Hi,
unmute
Dr. Williams.
yourself.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Dr. Williams, how are you? Hi, I had a question. Can you explain a little bit more and expand on the U.S. government exemption? I don't know if that's the right word. That it's until October 14th. So all of these new requirements will not go into effect if a U.S. government employee is traveling to the U.S. Is that how it will work?
Thank you for asking for that clarification. So all U.S. government employees still will be required to have a permit. So everybody needs a permit. The only difference is until October 14th, people who are showing up at the airport with a permit that says it's not JFK, like it's going to O'Hare Airport in Chicago or any other airport in the United States, if you ask for their U.S. official government passport, then you can verify that they're allowed to do that. We'll be issuing permits to ports of entry that are not JFK until October 14th for government employees.
Okay, I got it. Thank you very much.
They still need to have a permit. So if they show up with their U.S. government passport and say, hey, I'm exempt or whatever, and they don't have a permit, you still have to deny boarding because they need a permit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't see any further questions at this moment in time, but going on the previous question, I also have a question for you.
Yeah.
So what happens if the dog is not checked in by the US government official who is the owner? Would you accept a photocopied ID?
Okay,
Because
so
in certain cases,
the permits are allowed to have 2 people on it, so it can be the importer and then what we call the permit holder. So like if they're going to use a broker or somebody to submit the documents, that person may be on the permit. So yes, that situation can come up, but yeah, if you can verify like by a photo of the U.S. government passport, that should be fine as well, of the importer.
Thank you. This has triggered a couple of more questions. So now a number of them are flooding in. What is this US government passport? Is that a normal passport? Will advice be provided on how to verify US government officials' ID? Similar to...
So it looks like a regular passport around the world, and it looks like a U.S. passport, but on the front of the booklet, it just says government on it at the bottom. I don't know if I can find it online, just screen share. Do you want to go to the next question?
Yes, in the meantime, if we can just do that, and maybe we will share this information when we send out the handouts. The next question is, how many incidents were registered which led to this emergency decision?
So typically CDC on an average year will deny entry to about 300 dogs for inadequate vaccination records, like they're too young or they're missing information or they don't have a rabies vaccination certificate. But starting in 2020, throughout the whole year of 2020, we denied entry to over 450 animals, and that's a big jump from 300. And in 2021, those numbers are actually like the rate of denials that we're doing is continuing to be high, maybe even higher. And so it's like unsustainable for us to be able to find all these animals. Like there's just an increased number of animals flooding in that are way too young. They don't match the records. And you know, I don't think we catch all of them. So on an average year, we'll get 300, and in 2020 we had over 450, and I don't even know how many more were coming in that didn't meet our requirements.
Thank you. I don't see any further questions. If anybody's got any other questions, please ask now. This is your last opportunity because we are nearing the end of the webinar. I can see Marshall Myers. Would you like to ask your question, please? Please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
We can now. Thank you.
Okay. Mine is not a question, it's to advise you that in the last 48 hours, I have received several major fundraisers from rescue organizations and major international humane societies, raising as much money as possible to get dogs in here before July 14. So I think the carrier should be warned that you're likely to be inundated with requests to move animals into the United States at unprecedented rates. So just it's a warning, because I didn't realize I was so popular with such organizations.
CDC is already experiencing that. Like the past couple weeks since the announcement, the number of dogs coming in has just been astronomical, and a lot of them aren't meeting our requirements. So thank you for that, for bringing that up. But yeah, they're rushing to get in before the deadline.
Thank you. And I've received one more. Can you please confirm the same rules apply to animals traveling in cabin as well as cargo?
Yes, these rules apply to in cabin, in cargo, land border crossings, maritime, seaports of entry. Any way that an animal can get into the country, these rules apply.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Williams, for the presentation as well as for answering the questions. We will collate a Q&A that we will distribute. We, with the IATA Live Animal and Perishable Boards, have also put together a checklist that we will share with the airline industry that will enable carriers to conduct some basic checks and also to get a declaration from the shipper of compliance. This will be distributed after the meeting. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I would like to hand it back to Maria.
I will just say real quickly that I couldn't quickly find the picture of the government passport online, so I will get that to you with any other questions that you have. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Williams.
Thanks.
We will share that with the Q&As so the audience will understand what they need to look for. Maria, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriela, and thank you very much, Dr. Williams. I think that was extremely informative, and I think based on the fact that we don't have any remaining questions, that we were able to address all the concerns and inquiries that people had, so thank you very much for that. As mentioned to everybody, we will share the handouts for the session as soon as we're done, so it will appear on the IATA website. I will, in a moment, share the pages on which we will put that up. Just give me one second. So I think you can expect those to be up within the next few hours. If there are any other remaining questions, Dr. Williams's email will be on the presentation as well, so you could contact her for any additional questions that you may have, and also feel free to send over any inquiries to the LARPAIR inbox, if anything. Before we close, I just want to take the opportunity to highlight the CIB Live Animals program. You're all certainly aware with the IATA LAR, which of course provides comprehensive information about the requirements for handling and transporting live animals, and also ensures that compliance with national and international guidelines and regulation. The CIB Live Animals program is a certification quality program which goes a step beyond to ensure industry-wide harmonized processes and procedures, and validating that regulations essentially are being applied by parties across the supply chain, and benchmarks, of course, the quality and standard of your organization. The program itself consists of a training and 2 audits, which serve to establish baseline standards to improve the level of competency, infrastructure, and quality management in the handling and transportation of live animals throughout the supply chain. Upon completion of all the requirements, certification is issued by IATA, and the certified entity is listed on the IATA OneSource platform. So that's just to provide you some high-level information. If you're interested to know more or more in-depth steps in order to achieve certification, please do reach out to us. I've provided the email address for more information, as well as the website where the CIB Live Animals program is elaborated on further. So just to complete the session, I will leave this here for a couple of minutes. If you want to jot down the 2 websites as well as Dr. Williams's email. And as I mentioned, the information and all of the handouts and presentation and recording will be posted up there in the next few hours. So thank you all very much for participating. Thank you again to Gabriela and Dr. Williams for taking the time today to conduct this webinar. And I hope most of your questions have been addressed, and please do reach out to us if any further information is needed. Thank you, everybody, and have a good day, good afternoon, and good evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.